Miami Dolphins coaching staff assembly is just about complete. We have a few more moves here today we're going over on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. You're on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use code Locked On for $20 off of your first purchase. Special thank you to each and every one of you who helped to make the Locked On Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network in the world. Coaching staff maneuvers are whittling down. We had the final head coaching vacancy was filled yesterday with, in very rapid succession, the Raiders going with Clint Kubiak and then the Cardinals going with Mike LaFleur, which kind of affirmed that the Dolphins, who had Anthony Weaver under contract, was not going to get a head coaching search or a head coaching job. Shortly after that was finalized, it was announced that Sean Duggan, the Packers linebackers coach, who's been with Jeff Hafley at every stop since 2019 at Ohio State when Hafley was the co-defensive coordinator and Duggan was a grad assistant. He's now the DC. He's the extension of Jeff Hafley, the defensive coordinator. But that's kind of been rumored for about a week and a half now. So not a huge surprise that Sean Duggan is going to get the tab there. And it really gives you a strong foundation of kind of what you consider to be the current strength of this Dolphins depth chart is probably the linebackers, right? So I would say Tyrel Dodson is a fringe sufficient level starter. I think Jordyn Brooks is a roster cornerstone and an all-pro player and just an unbelievable farce of a Pro Bowl selection process that he wasn't named to the Pro Bowl, but named as an all-pro. But that's neither here nor there, right? Duggan coached linebackers last year in Green Bay. The team also brought in Al Washington, who we're going to talk a little bit about. I tapped in one of my colleagues over at A to Z Sports, Ryan Roberts, who's on the Notre Dame beat, to give me a little insight on Al Washington. So we'll talk about that a little later in the show. But then also one of the two moves that was announced this morning on Monday, February 2nd, was that the Dolphins were going to be bringing back Joe Barry, and they re-signed him to a new deal. And the other retention off of the staff being Austin Clark, the defensive line coach. So we'll put that up as a dub. Austin Clark's resume is quite strong for what he has been able to do with developing names like Zach Sieler and Christian Wilkins, and now this new guard of Kenneth Grant and Jordan Phillips and Zeke Biggers. But then you also look at guys like Deshaun Hand, who had career years in Miami under the watch of Austin Clark. And that felt like it was a no-brainer, a little bit of a different stylistic defense that the Dolphins should be expected to play under Jeff Hafley, but bringing back Austin Clark, I think, is a win, especially for those young players who have had that messaging, who have had that voice that formed them this past year to kind of have the continuity there, I think is a big win for that young nucleus of that part of the roster. But Joe Barry's an interesting one because he, too, is also a linebackers coach. He coached the Dolphins linebackers last year, right? And helped get that all-pro season out of Jordyn Brooks. So now you've got a linebackers coach, and now Washington, this was reported, has been hired. Joe Barry did linebackers last year. Sean Duggan, the DC, was the linebackers coach in Green Bay last year. Like, you've got a lot of point of emphasis in your coaching staff on that particular position room. Now, we don't know what Joe Barry's formal title is going to be with the Dolphins just yet. He could be the defensive run game coordinator, right? The Dolphins brought in, was it Downard? Ryan Downard as the defensive backs and defensive pass game coordinator. So maybe Joe Barry is linebacker / defensive run game coordinator, and he's responsible for the fits in the run game. Um, Maybe it's a different position. Maybe it's a senior defensive assistant, right? Like to be determined, at least at the time of this recording, it has not been um, cataloged where his role exactly is going to be. But he is a former defensive coordinator who's on the staff with Hafley, who's a former defensive coordinator and now a new defensive coordinator, and Sean Duggan. Like, I dig the experience. And I think Joe Barry and what he did with Jordyn Brooks last year was awesome. So I think that's a good retention. I really enjoyed every time I go down to training camp and I've had a chance to talk with Joe Barry. He's been very insightful. I like his approach, but it underscores the funny business that the NFL is, because when Joe Barry left Green Bay, he was the defensive coordinator and he left and came to Miami. And he kind of flip-flop spots with Anthony Campanile, who was the linebackers coach, and then Campanile ends up in 2024 as the linebackers coach there. But the guy who took Joe Barry's spot as the defensive coordinator in Green Bay was Jeff Hafley. Right? So the guy who replaced you in Green Bay comes down and gets the head coaching job, and then now you're going to work on his staff. And it is kind of the never say never element of the NFL, right? And that's also underscored by like the assistant offensive line coach hire of Matt Applebaum, right? Like Applebaum came up and coached the Dolphins offensive line in 22 and was a one and doneer. And then they brought in Butch Barry, and Applebaum went back to Boston College. And now lo and behold, here we are, and it's 2026, and Matt Applebaum's back on the staff as the assistant offensive line coach. And I think between him and Zach Yenser, you've got some good college experience. Applebaum obviously had the 1 year in Miami as the offensive line coach. Yenser has experience as an offensive line assistant coach between Houston and San Francisco. So a couple different dabblings of responsibilities and a whole lot of college experience, which we've talked about in the past. So that's where things stand with the influx. Duggan, that was announced yesterday. Joe Barry finalized under Duggan as the defensive coordinator. Austin Clark being retained as well. The role for Barry, don't know exactly just yet. We also had the news that the Dolphins were not retaining a coach that it was speculated that they would be retaining because he had time that overlapped with Jeff Hafley. And it kind of now looms as the big blank spot on the roster as far as what are we doing with this spot. We'll get in that next here, Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. A big game is almost here, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. This week, Prize Picks has a special max discount for the big game. Live in the app right now. You will find it available to you. Drake May needs one passing yard for the max discount to win. Add another player to your lineup, and if your picks hit, you can cash in. Prize Picks is super simple to use. Takes no time to get started. The whole format is clean. You pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections. It makes watching the game that much more fun because every drive and every stat matters to you. And the social feeds is awesome. You can share lineups and even copy lineups from winners with one click. Download the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It is good to be right. Kicking off the new year is all about feeling good, right? Like that's the goal. And honestly, hydration is an easy win that you can attain. When you want to stay on top of it, it helps your energy, your focus, and your mood. But let's be real, plain water doesn't always cut it, especially when you're grinding through long days, hitting the gym, or trying to stay consistent with your health goals. That's where Drip Drop comes in. Doctor-developed, proven fast hydration that helps your body and mind work together. You get thick with clear focus. You can have better energy. You can have elevated mood, and even that fresh skin glow. And Drip Drop being a part of your daily routine is helpful because there's variety at your disposal too. It tastes amazing. They've got a bunch of different flavors, 16 in total, 16 original flavors, 8 zero sugar options to choose from if you prefer not to drink your calories. Right now, Drip Drop is offering podcast listeners 20% off your first order. Go to dripdrop.com, use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's dripdrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 20% off. Stock up now at dripdrop.com. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. John Embee, tight ends coach, was the assistant head coach for the Dolphins under Mike McDaniel. It had kind of been assumed that Embree was going to be back on the staff. The Dolphins obviously had not made a tight ends coach hire. Embree, you go back to being a tight ends coach 2006 with the Chiefs. In Washington, he was the head coach at Colorado, tight ends coach in 2013, tight ends coach in Tampa 14 through 16, San Francisco 49ers 17 through 21, assistant head coach, tight end coach, same role for the Dolphins 22 through present day. So extensive list of experience and working in tight end rooms across the NFL. And it's hard to judge, in my opinion, the work that Embree did as a tight ends coach, because the Dolphins never really gave him an investment, right? It was a bunch of lottery tickets with undrafted rookies, whether that was Tanner Connor or Julian Hill, or trying to make it work with Mike Gesicki on the franchise tag when it was abundantly clear the kind of skill set that he had and the way in which it conflicted with the style of offense that Miami ran in 22. Then you have guys like Jonnu Smith who come in free agency, good scheme fit, was a Band-Aid for some of the things that were broken with the offense in 24. 25, they go Darren Waller and Greg Dulcich, and Dulcich is very good the back half of the season, and Waller was great, but Waller was very rarely healthy and not available to you. So probably the most consistent name that he had was Julian Hill as the inline player. And I thought Julian took a nice step forward, all things considered, this past year in Miami. I think he's earned himself an extended opportunity as kind of a role player, right, within their defense or within their tight end room. But I don't think he's at the point where you can put eggs in that basket and say this is our starting tight end. And that's kind of where the Dolphins have been with Julian Hill. When you consider what the workload volume's been like for him. He's been 343 snaps as a rookie, an undrafted rookie in 23. He started 11 games in each of the last 2 years. He missed 3 games this past year, played 441 snaps, 514 year before. Big time special teams role and impact. All things considered, he's played almost 1,800 snaps. It's a pretty big workload. I mean, he's done very well for himself in that regard. Julian Hill has, but that position, knowing what it's supposed to mean for this kind of offense, would kind of expect a little bit more of a neutral skill set. I mean, you think about what the Texans have, right, with Bobby Slowik. And Dalton Schultz has kind of been, he got his career started in Dallas and he played 5 seasons in Dallas. And then the last 3 years with the Houston Texans. So the 2 years in which Bobby Slowik was the offensive coordinator in Houston, Dalton Schultz went 88 targets for 59 receptions for 635 yards and 5 touchdowns. And then 85 targets for 53 receptions, 532 and 2 touchdowns. Now, he had a huge spike this year. He went up to 777 receiving yards, but that came at the lowest yards per catch he's had in any season other than in 2019 when he caught 1 pass for 6 yards. So, like, the efficiency of Schultz's role this year went down, but he's kind of like he's a blocker, but also a zone buster underneath and find soft spaces underneath. And I think if the Dolphins can get a little bit more of the true drop back stuff that Miami hasn't had, like a very robust drop back game the past couple years, then I think a role playing tight end like this that I don't necessarily think is Julian Hill. I think that kind of puts him more in like the Josh Oliver tight end 2 as a blocker type. Is probably the kind of skill set that you can expect to see or would expect to see. So we'll keep that in mind as we go through the draft and look at free agencies, but we ultimately need to know who the tight end coach is going to be. And that feels like it's the biggest vacancy, right? Maybe you get a run game coordinator. Maybe you get a pass game coordinator offensively. Right, the Dolphins interviewed Gerard Johnson at one point. He's the quarterbacks coach in Houston. Does he take a non-offensive coordinator role and join the Dolphins staff? Right, but Nathaniel Hackett's the quarterbacks coach. Liddell Betts is the running backs coach. Tyke Tolbert's the wide receivers coach. Your offensive line, you've got Zach Yenzer and you've got Matt Applebaum to coach the offensive line. Bobby Slowik's the offensive coordinator. You need a tight end coach and whatever coordinators you get, like specified coordinators, run game coordinator, pass game coordinator. So we're pretty close to done, all things considered. But yeah, that change was one that kind of caught me by surprise a little bit for John Embee to be out with Miami. But it does open up kind of like this last mystery bag, who they going to get higher to add to the ranks. I want to talk a little bit about one of the other mystery bag hires that the Dolphins have, just because he's coming up and making a leap to the pros for the first time. That's Al Washington. We're going to talk about him next. Make sure you guys stick with us. New year, new systems. This is the time when a lot of us look at the messier parts of how we run our businesses and think there has to be a better way. And there is. Streamlining your communications is one of the quickest upgrades that you can make. That's why today's episode is brought to you by Quo, spelled Quo, the smarter way to run your business communications, because when your team is reachable, organized, and communicating in one place, you're not just working cleaner, you're creating more opportunities to connect with customers. I love how simple Quo makes everything. Your whole team can call and text from one shared business number, so nothing gets missed. Everyone sees the full conversation thread, which makes replies faster, more personal, and Quo's smart AI tools automatically log calls, summarize conversations, and highlight next steps. It's no surprise that Quo was rated #1 among business phone systems on G2, trusted by more than 90,000 businesses, from solo operators to growing teams. Make this the year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo for free, plus 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/lockedonnfl. That's QUO.com/lockedonnfl. Quo, no missed calls and no missed customers. There is nothing like being at an NBA arena. The crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, part's not always so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast without the hassle. It puts the advantage back where it belongs, in your hands. You can pull up the Game Time app, pick an upcoming NBA game, and get tickets locked in within minutes. I love that they have all-in pricing, so there's no surprise fees when you put the tickets into your cart. You can get the panoramic seat views, so there's no surprise views and sightlines when you get to the arena. Everything feels quick, intuitive, and stress-free from start to finish. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDON for 20% or $20 off your first order. That's LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not gametime.com. Al Washington was reported last week to be the Dolphins. It was hired as a linebackers coach. Now, I don't know, is he off-ball linebackers? Is he outside linebackers? Is Joe Barry doing inside linebackers? Like, this could shake out in a number of different ways. And when they release the full staff, that's when we'll finally get the idea. But Al Washington, since 2019, has been Ohio State, Notre Dame, and now the Dolphins. In 2018, he was with Michigan. So I reached out to Ryan Roberts, who's on the Notre Dame beat, and Washington's been there since 2022, coaching the defensive line for Notre Dame. And I asked him for some insight, and I said, this is one of those mystery ones for Dolphins fans. He's got no NFL experience. People are kind of curious, like, what's this guy all about? What can you tell me? And here's what Ryan wrote back. I want to read the passage. It's also going to go up on a story for A to Z Sports today that I'm writing. When Washington was hired by Notre Dame prior to 2022, it was a hire that Irish fans didn't know what to make of. Sounds familiar. Before coming to South Bend, Washington's most recent coaching experience was as the linebacker coach for Ohio State. During those 3 years, he tutored the likes of Pete Werner and Baron Browning. I like where we're going. Washington hadn't coached defensive line since 2017 with Cincinnati, where he was on the same staff as Notre Dame head coach Marcus Freeman. So you mean to tell me coaches make hires with people they know everywhere? That's not just a pandemic that's hit the Dolphins in 2026. Got it. Washington's best stop as a defensive line coach came in 2016 in Boston College, his alma mater. Harold Landry led the FBS in sacks. Zach Allen was a tremendous player for the Eagles before Washington opted to take the job of the Dolphins. He was set to shift over to linebackers with the Irish as well. It was a career goal to become a defensive coordinator for Washington. So the shift to linebackers was used as the best step forward towards achieving that goal. As a defensive line coach with Notre Dame, Washington's units were known for being consistent from technical perspective, particularly in the run game. Units have experience with both one gap and two gap techniques, where the Irish defense was mostly a four-man front. There was a complete buy-in from the defensive line room in Washington. He was a very well-liked coach in general. The motor they played with was admirable, and the defensive lines were very active. The biggest question mark with Notre Dame defensive line has been around the pass rush. Notre Dame has used a lot of movement up front. Most of this was out of necessity. The Irish defensive lines haven't been known for an array of pass rush moves or counters. Washington is going to need to show that he could develop a pass rush unit. So the assessment and then the time at Ohio State kind of makes you feel like maybe this is not an outside linebacker / rush linebacker group. Maybe this is your authentic linebacker coach, and Joe Barry's title is going to end up being defensive run game coordinator or senior defensive assistant, right? But I can confirm, kind of thinking back to those scouting reports for Harold Landry and Zach Allen at Boston College, and then Pete Werner and Baron Browning, and that linebacker group was a lot of fun to retrospectively look back on and think about the scouting reports I wrote about those guys and the football IQ, and to know that there's a common thread in the coaching that's tying those guys at Ohio State to those guys at Boston College with obviously very different skill set. Al Washington in 2016 did special teams and the defensive line. So I take encouragement in knowing that he's had experience with both, and he's done well in both, to kind of paint the picture of a guy who can fill a number of different needs relative to the other coaches that you have on the staff. I do think it's interesting that his aspirations for a defensive coordinator had led him to the NFL, but I think this elevated experience could be useful for him. And I think back to names like Riley Mills on the defensive line, and that Notre Dame's had. And I have seen guys that play with extension and play with their hands and get off of blocks, but have the ability to penetrate and play games and twist and stunt up front. I'm excited to see how Al Washington makes this leap. But it was kind of a good review from Ryan Roberts to kind of go back through the years with somebody that's been in the weeds with his individual destinations and invoke some of those names that then take me back as a scout, in which I scouted and wrote scouting reports for those players. Landry and Allen and Pete Werner. I love Pete Werner coming out, man. He was a lot of fun. And then Baron Browning, the year that he came out, we actually had with us on our staff at the Draft Network at the time. We did an NFLPA job like trial, where guys that like in the off season would like trial with media companies, and we had an NFL linebacker on the staff. He's like a career special teams guy, and he's doing scouting evals with us. And we're watching and talking about Pete Werner and Baron Browning. And it's like, holy smokes. These guys are really excited, like very different skill sets, but very exciting in what they all bring to the table. So I think that's for Al Washington. I want to know what the roster looks like for coaches, because it's going to allow me to dig deeper into what his role's been in those stops. But the fact that there is an impressive body of work and player development at multiple positions has me optimistic that this is a coach based on his reputation, and that his body of work with these different position rooms can be an impactful hire for the Dolphins. I like his energy a lot. You can kind of Google some coaching clinic stuff that he's done and kind of get an idea of what he's all about. You can find that stuff on the internet if you know where to look. So that's going to do it for us here today on the show. Kyle Krabs, keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. I'll be back to talk to you all again tomorrow. Fins up.